Man, it's impressive how just a little thing placed in the scene completely changes the image. Well, until now, the whole scene, the tiles, the things in the game, it was all more or less the same thing, just with different images, right? There was the grass scene, the earth scene, the stone scene, the sea scene, and everything mixed together to have a different visual, but it all worked the same way, right? And that has totally changed now, okay? Because I created the water scene, which is what was needed. Right? You can't not have a water scene, and it totally changes the entire aesthetic of the place, right? Because they are animated tiles, which I thought was going to be a bit difficult to do, since the method changed in God of War, right? Before it was much more practical, but now it seems they have just to make animated tiles, and it was very smooth to do and works very well. Even when placing it here, you can see that it becomes fully animated even in the creation of the tiles, in the creation of maps. And why is the water scene different from the others? It's not just the same scene with only one different visual element, but rather it isn't. As I have this idea of having free navigation through the scene, if I can walk around, unlike normal tactical games where you interact with the scene only in battles, which have that grid movement, and when you walk on the map, you literally walk on the map. There's a map and you move from city to city by walking on it. That's pretty common, right? There's Final Fantasy Tactics, there are several other games of this style, especially because it is an inspiration, right? So it ends up taking more of this idea. And the settings even start to resemble some stages, something like that, right? Of course not exactly because you move through them, you have a whole story happening and not, it's a level-based game, not an RPG. But here there's this idea, so I need to make some changes, some things, and I would like to be able to navigate through water scenes too, right? Not just be an obstacle there, a place you can't go. So the character will indeed be able to enter the water areas, which will have different depths visible on the character. As you can see here, there's a scenario where the water is shallower, right? It's roughly ankle deep, you can walk normally. A scenario where the water is a bit deeper, you walk a little slower. Even the character's walking animation changes. The particle effects are different, right? Because on land, there's that characteristic dust effect. There are usually effects for footsteps, but in water you can't make dust, right?
It was so smooth. Now it's different when you add water particles. And there is also a deeper, more profound background that for now will be an obstacle, a place where you can't go, but it won't necessarily always be like that. When I say that the system would mount, it will allow you to walk on it here like this, when it allows you to climb places you wouldn't be able to. And I already have the whole little system kind of planned out. I haven't put it in yet, but it's already planned, and for those who haven't seen the page, there's even a sort of spoiler of how the game's mount will be, which is about a mix of a kangaroo with a horse, something like that. It might not be exactly like what is on the page there, okay? It's a temporary image, but you can see it's already working, okay? The water trails, just like the waterfall, okay, because like all the other tiles, it has different heights, right? If I want to place a water tile in a higher place, I would need a higher water tile. Taking advantage of this, I've already made the waterfall, right? So if I want to place a water tile on the edge of a cliff, something like that, it will already be represented there. The fall, it could be a smaller fall, right? Like the water tile with little water, and even a fall similar to a waterfall, right? It would be far, being it's with more water, where the character sinks a little more. And with these animated tiles, I believe it's possible to create much prettier environments, much better than they were, giving a much nicer atmosphere. Impressive, isn't it? How one simple addition can have a very cool effect on the visuals. But that's not all I'm going to show here, okay? This is just an extra thing I added, as I had already shown. And as I mentioned here too, don't forget guys, give some support, go to the games page, add the game to your wish list. That helps a lot, okay? The game's wish list is gradually growing, and it's very good that this keeps growing. That's very good. The promotion of the game ends up being a bit more organic, it's much better, and ends up also reflecting on the success of the game, also reflecting on the ways the game is made. There's a lot of feedback from the people. I think that's really cool. So give it a little support, add your wish, it helps a lot. And of course I didn't do it last week because I was more focused on building the game's page, but there will indeed be a new class in today's video. and it's a class I had already thought of. In fact, I had thought of many skills for this class. I haven't made them all yet. I don't know if I'll include all the skills I had thought of for this class because the disparity would be too much. It's a class with many abilities, unlike others that don't have many, but I will definitely create new abilities for the other classes, okay? And before talking about the new class, speaking of new abilities, I also created a new ability which is the skill of precision, which is a buff, okay? That I still don't know if I'm going to put it on our gunslinger or on the hunter, but it is a buff that gives you the ability to deal critical damage, right? So you have a buff where all your attacks are critical from then on. Of course, only physical attacks, right? Because in this game, the types of attacks change a lot, okay? I haven't talked much about this, but magic attacks do not deal critical damage, okay? But as a consequence, magic attacks also do not miss. So whenever you use a fire strike, an ice strike, it will always hit the target, unless the target has some resistance to it. However, it will never deal critical damage, unlike physical strikes. And there is a chance of error, but there is a chance to deal critical damage, okay? And even the critical damage in this game changes a lot. Critical damage for some piercing weapons has the ability to ignore defense. For slashing weapons, it increases damage even further. And so on. I even intend to make blunt weapons create some effects like pushing the enemy or causing a stun. I will make a better balance for this, but there is this effect, concentration, precision. It will give you the effect of always causing critical damage while the buff is active, and it will also make all your attacks ignore evasion. So while you have this, you will hit all attacks, which is a very good combo, including for headshots, which is that thrill. It's a skill that gives you a very high damage effect. You have very high damage, you have no cost to use it, but you had the penalty of reduced accuracy, right? You're aiming at the head, there's more chance of missing. And with this skill, you will never miss, so besides not missing and dealing critical damage, you will still have this buff. And it can have a whole effect, right? You can still apply that knight ability to increase damage dealt to the enemy, dealing damage from behind. So in the end, you can scale a lot of damage. And I find these tactical games very cool. It's really good. When you can combine some skills, one to kind of compensate for the deficiency of the other, right? All of this will be even more possible when they add the trait system to the skills, which is the customization system for each one. So you can add new things to each skill. But besides that, we have a new class here, okay? Initially, it would be the evolution of our cleric, right? Of our priest. But I'm thinking of changing it to be the evolution of the wizard, okay? Because it became a bit more offensive than supportive. It has more or less a supportive and offensive. But it became much more about using things on enemies than on allies, which will be more or less the counterpart of what a time mage is in Final Fantasy Tactics. But here it has a slightly different meaning, okay? I don't know if it was noticeable exactly, but the effect that gives you magic block, right? That effect from the priest that gives you a chance to block magical attacks. It's called Void. Its effect is exactly to remove the ether in that area, right? So it gives you a little barrier there, which would be an ether vacuum barrier. So that's why the spells can't get through and you can block that magic. And what does this new class do, right? Which I am thinking of naming Voidmancer or Void Mage. It's basically about controlling that void of ether, okay? So you can somewhat control that emptiness. And with that, create more or less gravity effects, right? More or less. It's what the tiny mage does, right? If you look at his abilities, it's kind of a manipulation of space-time, just like gravity does. It even has gravity powers itself. So there's that little cliche, right? The skills I created here. So there will be the skills of haste and slow, right? To speed up and slow down. It would be a basic control of time there, right? And unlike Final Fantasy Tactics, I made these two skills into one skill, okay? So I created the first skill here that analyzes if you are attacking an enemy or an ally all at the same time, okay? It's an area ability. So I use the time distortion ability where your allies are sped up and your enemies are slowed down, right? Your enemies have their speed reduced. And this can all be done simultaneously, okay, when it's an area attack. So you can create an area that affects your allies, your enemies, and causes this effect on everyone. This is a combo, right? Because if you are faster, your enemies are slower, your turn comes quicker, because your enemies take longer to act. So you can kind of combine this if you hit a good area, if you're able to create a good tactic. All in one ability, and the ultimate control of time would be to stop time, right? So we also have the time lock here, which I will say is the temporal halt, which is to stop the enemy. Okay, so give 100% for this, just like that knight's ability that increases the damage for the enemy. Take it, right? It doesn't cause damage, it doesn't do anything besides that, but it only causes a negative effect. The stop is basically that, okay? But since it's a much more broken effect, right? That paralyzes the enemy doesn't play for a while. Much more than the stun, okay? Because the stun is that effect that's caused there for some continuous effect on the head. There's a possibility of causing it, but it lasts only one turn, okay? Whereas the stop lasts much longer and the enemy is paralyzed for a good amount of time. If no one heals them, they will be stuck for a while. It's not that long, okay? You don't lose the game just because of this, but it's a considerable time, okay? And this, for strategy, it's very good. So it has, of course, a chance to miss, right? It's not 100% chance with a knight's skill. For that, I need a small skill here for space control. I thought about adding the float, okay? But that would cause me some other problems because, as I said before, you have free movement around the map and the float would allow you to move through areas that you generally can't, right? If I could float here with the float, I could go through the deep areas even without having a mount. And as soon as the battle ended, if I were in those deep areas or somewhere else, I would kind of get stuck and that would not be good for the game. So I removed the float for now, okay? At least until I can find a good solution for this. But I added here a translocation ability. You can swap places with your target. And there's a little extra effect where you deal damage if your target is an enemy. And heal if your target is an ally. So it's an ability that analyzes this kind of thing. And besides swapping places, it has various functions. You can kind of reposition the characters. If you see that there's a more isolated enemy, you can pull them to inside your allies. You can escape if you are surrounded. So it's a very useful ability. Very good for you to use. Using such an ability can save you from some moments. Although the damage is not that high, it is lower than the basic common attack. It's magic damage. So it doesn't cause critical damage, but still it's not exactly made for damage. It's more made for you to have that movement, and you still have the slot where you can modify this ability. And it couldn't miss the whole idea of the void, not just the modification of time and space. There's also the fact that you remove the ether from the area, which is more or less how the void works. So you have this modification. This dark ether is actually the absence of ether, and you can of course remove it. See the ether over your target. So you are there with a skill that essentially drains the target's mana. You take away the target's mana, but there's a little secret in this skill. Exactly a secret. It will be in the skill's description. But if you use this skill on a target that is freezing a skill, you not only cancel their freezing, you cause silence on the target. So it's another new negative effect here, and it prevents the target from using the skill for a while. So he will still be able to move, he will still be able to use the basic attack, but he won't be able to use any other abilities, and besides that, you cancel the freezing of the enemy. So it can save you at some point, it can be useful, especially because just like the transvocation or the vortex, this ability is instantaneous. Even though it's a magic ability, it doesn't have a cast, because that's the idea of this ability. You will be able to interrupt the target's cast. If you needed to cast, it wouldn't be as useful. So it works very well. I did some tests. Removing the MP from enemies is very good. So you're essentially undermining the wizards, an almost 100% anti-magic ability, but that's more or less the idea of the void, which is to remove the ether from the place. There will still be some abilities. I thought of some other things, like attraction, repulsion, teleportation, things like that for this class, but I haven't added them yet. I'm thinking about whether I will put everything in this class, because there are some other classes where this type of ability fits better, but for now that's it. I wanted to show a bit of the design I did for it, since it is a class that deals with time. Something like that. I've always imagined characters in this style, with a kind of steampunk style that has many clocks, lots of things, similar in this style of aesthetics. So I tried to create an aesthetic more or less similar, with a top hat, a kind of internal outfit with a clock to represent the time aspect, and the color purple as well, more or less the idea of the void, more or less the color of the void, which is the black ether. It also has a slightly purple tone. I really like the aesthetic it ended up with.
It's worth mentioning too that these sprites I make might seem a bit simple, but that's kind of the idea. I want to give a certain clarity to these sprites, especially because they are essentially more generic characters. They are not exactly the main characters of everything. The main characters will have some elements that characterize them, so maybe the character will have a cape, a helmet, something extra that will complement the generic class visual that will be altered according to the class you are using. And combining all this will give a slightly different aesthetic to each character, just like the races, the character's gender. All of this will be altered, right? So this here is all something more generic. So as you can see, all the characters still have a characteristic aesthetic of each class. You can identify there that it's a mage, that it's a thief, which is a gunslinger, a cowboy. But when applied to a character, this will be a bit different, okay? It will be a bit more characteristic of each one, and whoever wants to take a look at the characters, the designs I am creating, okay, I will be creating and adding them to the game's page. You saw there, the page's art has already changed a bit since the last video, right? Because I couldn't help it, I had to try work a bit more on these designs, right? Because I'm even practicing a bit in my artistic area because it helps in promotion, right? And I think promotion is very important for any game. So I'm also working on that part, I'm putting it there. So don't forget, alright folks, to give a style there, it helps a lot. If anyone also wants to take a look at my other games, okay, there are some, I'll leave them in the description. There's Ninja Monkey, which is also on Steam, okay? Give it some support there, it's great if you check it out. It helps me a lot too. I'm a bit busy, you know, because of work and other things I keep doing, but I always keep moving forward here, always trying to show you. I always try to show everything I'm doing, always in the true form of the game, right? So that's it, right? We have much prettier environments now with water in them, right? I'm going to try for a lot more elements, okay? Real visual elements this time too, not just tiles, right? Add rocks, add plants, new things, right? That will give an art a different identity, but I haven't done it yet, and it will be added, right? There are only those standard trees I made to create the standard game obstacle, and in some time this scenario will become much more beautiful, okay? So don't worry, there's going to be much more, and thank you very much for having very cool game. Every time I create something new, especially with visuals, I keep looking at it and it ends up getting even cooler, and I pay a lot more to make the game. And that's it, goodbye.